Imagine this: a king not on the battlefield but on the temple steps. In front of his court, in front of the gods, he takes a rope studded with obsidian thorns, and then he drags it across his own genitals, flesh tearing, blood streaming. The crowd gasps, but no one dares intervene, because this isn't madness, it's religion. For the Maya, sex and pain were not private, they were sacred. Blood was the food of the gods. Semen was the seed of creation. To withhold either was to risk cosmic collapse. That is why they bled themselves. That is why they burned their own essence. That is why their temples reeked of sweat iron and fire. It is easy to admire the Maya for their art and astronomy. But to truly understand them, we must also confront this truth: their civilization demanded more than stone and sacrifice. It demanded the body itself. And the deeper we look, the more disturbing it becomes. For the Maya, blood was not just life, it was money. A currency the gods demanded, a debt that could never truly be paid. And unlike gold or jade, this treasure could only be drawn from living flesh. Picture the ritual: the ruler steps forward, obsidian blade in hand. Silence grips the crowd. Then, without hesitation, he slices across his own tongue. Blood pours into a bowl, thick and dark, and priests stir it with strips of bark. The bark is then set aflame, the smoke rising like an offering into the heavens. To us, it's grotesque. To them, it was nourishment for the divine. But the most shocking detail: the Maya believed that the genitals were the most potent source of this sacred currency. Kings, queens, nobles, all were expected to pierce themselves with stingray spines or jagged thorns. Each drop of blood carried the promise of fertility, cosmic balance, and continued rule. Without it, the sun might falter, the crops might wither, the gods might abandon the world. And it was not enough to bleed once. Rituals demanded repetition. Again and again, flesh-torn wounds reopened the body, forced to pay its tithe. Imagine the scars left behind a ruler's power, carved not only in monuments, but etched into his very skin. This was the terrifying logic of Maya society. The greater your status, the greater your obligation to bleed. Power did not shield you, it consumed you. In Maya civilization, sex was never private. It was public, political, and above all sacred. The union of bodies was seen as a mirror of the cosmos, male and female earth, and sky blood and seed. But behind this poetry lay practices that blur the line between devotion and cruelty. Royal couples were often expected to perform ritual intercourse during ceremonies, not in secrecy, but before priests and nobles, sometimes even before the eyes of the people. Why? Because their union was not about love, it was about proving their fertility as vessels of divine will. A king who could not inseminate, a queen who could not conceive, was seen as cursed, a danger to the stability of the world itself. The pressure was relentless. Queens endured forced sexual rituals, sometimes with fertility shamans to ensure heirs. Kings were pushed into proving their virility in public spectacles, sometimes under the influence of hallucinogens that blurred the line between reality and divine vision. Sex became less about desire and more about transaction. The body offered, the gods appeased, society reassured. And it went further. Sexual fluids themselves were viewed as sacred substances. Semen, like blood, was a gift to the gods, a liquid promise of life. Some rituals demanded its collection, an offering often mixed with blood burned as incense to carry its essence skyward. This intertwining of sex and power reveals something brutal. Intimacy was stripped of privacy and transformed into obligation. Pleasure was secondary. Survival of the kingdom, its crops, its armies, its divine mandate depended on these acts. To be royal in the Maya world was to live your sex life under the crushing gaze of gods and people alike. For the Maya, sex was not only sacred, it was sharpened into something darker. Pain was woven into pleasure. To reach the gods, desire had to be tested, purified, even broken. One of the most disturbing rituals involved piercing the genitals. Kings drove stingray spines or obsidian blades through their penises, letting blood drip onto bark paper that was then burned, the smoke believed to carry their essence to the heavens. But the cruelty did not end with men. Women of the elite pierced their tongues or even their genitals, offering the gods both blood and sexual sacrifice in a single act of devotion. To modern eyes, this is torture disguised as worship. But to the Maya, it was the highest form of intimacy, with the divine sexual pain transformed into cosmic currency. The deeper the wound, the greater the offering, the louder the gods would hear. Imagine the psychological toll. A young prince barely of age expected to mutilate himself in public. A queen forced to bleed on ritual days, her body turned into both temple and altar. There was no private body in Maya belief, only vessels to be opened, displayed, consumed by fire and prayer. And yet there is a haunting duality here. These people saw no contradiction between desire and pain. Pleasure was fleeting, but pain left. Marks drew blood, created smoke. Pain was permanent, undeniable, holy. It leaves us with a chilling truth, for the Maya sex was not just about creation, but destruction. And only through destruction could the cycle of life continue. For the Maya elite, sex was never just personal, it was political. Royal blood was seen as divine. And to keep that blood, pure boundaries between family and desire blurred in ways that now feel unbearable to imagine. Brother and sister could be bound not only by lineage, but by marriage. Uncles took nieces, cousins joined in unions, all in the name of keeping the sacred line untainted by outsiders. The body was not free to love, it was a sign traded and commanded for dynastic survival. Behind the glitter of jade jewelry and towering temples lay suffocating intimacy. A princess might be ordered to share a bed with her own blood, her body reduced to a pawn in her father's game of gods and politics. A prince might be forced to call his sister both sibling and wife, knowing the eyes of the court judged his ability to obey more than his capacity to feel. But even this was not the full darkness. These unions were often paired with rituals of fertility, public displays where desire and duty merged. The act of sex itself could become a performance for the gods, overseen by priests who believed conception was as much a divine contract as a human moment. What emerges is a portrait of intimacy stripped of choice. Love did not matter. Consent did not matter. Only bloodline power and cosmic order mattered. In this world, the forbidden was not taboo, it was tradition. And tradition crushed everything beneath it. It forces us to ask, what is the cost of worshiping purity? For the Maya rulers, the price was an endless cycle of beds that never truly belonged to those who lay in them. In the Maya world, not all rituals happened in the secrecy of temples. Some were staged as public performances designed to terrify, inspire, and bind entire communities under the weight of divine authority. And at the center of these spectacles, sex could become a weapon. Captured enemies were often stripped naked, their humiliation part of the ritual itself. Bound, displayed, and mocked, their bodies were no longer their own. They belonged to the victors and ultimately to the gods. Sexual degradation was sometimes woven into these ceremonies not for pleasure, but for dominance. To break an enemy's dignity was to break their soul, to feed the gods with fear as much as with blood. Even within society, sexual rituals could carry an element of public pressure. The fertility of rulers might be demonstrated before the watching eyes of nobles, proving not only their personal potency, but their divine favor. These acts blurred the line between sacred offering and public theater, between intimacy and humiliation. What's most chilling is how normalized it was. The crowd did not see cruelty, they saw order restored. The The cosmos balanced, the gods appeased. The pain of the few became the reassurance of the many. Imagine standing in that plaza, the smell of burning incense, the chants of priests, the sight of naked flesh pierced, mocked, sacrifice not hidden, but displayed, transformed into cosmic drama. Sex stripped of tenderness became part of the machinery of power, where humiliation was not a shame, but an offering. This was the paradox of Maya ritual, the sacred and the obscene woven together under the merciless gaze of both gods and people. The Maya did not enter their rituals sober. To meet the gods, they altered the mind. Hallucinogens, tobacco-fermented drinks, and even enemas laced with psychedelic substances were consumed until visions blurred the line between flesh and spirit. In this haze, sex took on a supernatural weight. Couples, priests, and rulers believed they were not merely touching each other, but bridging realms, joining with gods or ancestral spirits. Hallucinogens turned the body into a portal, and every gasp, every spasm, every drop of sweat became a cosmic signal. But this ecstasy often came at a cost. Intoxicated to the point of losing control, participants were vulnerable to manipulation. Priests could dictate what visions meant, shaping hallucinations into divine commands. The gods demand more blood. The gods demand more seed. The gods demand submission. In these altered states, consent blurred. What was imposed could feel ordained. For rulers, the stakes were even higher. Under the influence, they were expected to pierce themselves to bleed to perform sexual rites before the eyes of both gods and people. Pain, intoxication, and desire fused into one overwhelming storm, a ritual theater where suffering became a spectacle of faith. To us, it looks like exploitation disguised as ecstasy. But for the Maya, this was the height of devotion, to lose one's body, one's mind, and even one's will in service of cosmic balance. They believed the gods demanded not just obedience, but complete surrender. It is a haunting picture, sex, not only as spectacle, not only as pain, but as hallucination, where the body itself dissolved into smoke, leaving only sacrifice behind. For the Maya, the ultimate offering was not just blood, it was life itself. And sometimes sex and death were bound so tightly that one could not exist without the other. Ritual sacrifice often followed acts of sexual symbolism. Victims, sometimes captives, sometimes even chosen members of the community, were stripped, paraded, and prepared not only as offerings, but as living representations of fertility. In these moments, their bodies became sacred instruments used to echo the primal act of creation before being destroyed. One of the most disturbing accounts describes victims being forced into sexualized dances, their bodies painted, adorned, and displayed as if they were avatars of divine lust. Then, at the height of tension, when desire had been invoked, when the air was thick with chants and drumming, the knife fell. Pleasure and agony collapsed into one, a performance meant not for human satisfaction, but for the insatiable hunger of the gods. And it was not always swift. Hearts torn out, while drums thundered, blood smeared on idols as crowds cheered. Sex became a prelude to annihilation, and annihilation itself was dressed as sacred passion. The Maya believed that only through this ultimate merging, the seed of life followed by the extinguishing of life, could the cosmos be renewed. It forces a chilling reflection in this world. Intimacy was never safe. It was never private. It was never just between two people. At any moment, it could be claimed by religion, transformed into theater, and swallowed by death. In the Maya vision of existence, creation demanded destruction, and the most intimate act of all, the act of sex, was often just the prologue to sacrifice. What happens to a society where sex is tied to pain, humiliation, and death? For the Maya, the answer was written not only in stone carvings and codices, but in the unspoken weight carried through their daily lives. Families who offered their children or relatives as sacrifices were celebrated publicly, yet privately lived with grief, that could never be voiced. To question the rituals was to question the gods, and so silence became survival. Trauma was buried beneath ceremony. A father could watch his son dressed as an offering, a mother see her daughter paraded in sacred humiliation, and still be expected to chant, to cheer, to believe. For the survivors of these rites, scars were not only physical, but spiritual. Women and men used in sexual ceremonies carried the memory of public exposure, of being consumed by the crowd's gaze. Some may have seen themselves as chosen vessels of divinity. Others surely felt broken, stripped of dignity in the name of gods who never bled for them. This culture of ritualized sex and death shaped gender roles and power itself. Rulers used fear to reinforce their authority, presenting themselves as mediators between life and the divine. Priests maintained control by dictating which acts were sacred and which were profane. Ordinary people trapped in this system learned to accept cruelty as order, violence as harmony. It is easy to see the grandeur of Maya pyramids, their intricate calendars, their dazzling art. But beneath the brilliance lay a society shadowed by fear, where intimacy was never free, and the line between devotion and domination was blurred beyond recognition. The Maya civilization is often remembered for its mathematics, astronomy, and towering temples. But behind the brilliance was a darker truth, a society where sex could be weaponized, where pleasure and pain merged into spectacle, and where death was dressed as sacred intimacy. These rituals did not vanish without leaving scars. They revealed the terrifying ease with which power can hijack human instinct, turning love into control, reproduction into ritual, and bodies into currency for gods and rulers alike. For the Maya, this system justified itself through cosmic necessity. For us, it is a mirror, showing how belief, fear, and authority can twist even the most natural of human bonds. And here lies the most unsettling thought: the Maya are gone, but the pattern is not. History repeats in quieter forms. Societies still police bodies in the name of morality. Leaders still demand sacrifice under the mask of tradition. The language has changed, the costumes are different, but the mechanism, the weaponization of intimacy, remains frighteningly familiar. This is why their story matters. It forces us to ask, when does devotion become submission? When does ritual become abuse? And how many of our own practices, dressed in respectability, are just echoes of the same dark dance? The Maya built pyramids that reached for the heavens, but beneath them lay altars slick with blood. Their genius and their brutality coexisted inseparable. And if we are not careful, the same coexistence will mark us too, our progress balanced on shadows we refuse to confront. The most horrific sexual practices of the Maya are not just a chapter of the past. They are a warning whispered across centuries. When power controls the body, the soul is never safe.